I have always relied on feelings. If I feel that I need to do something, then I will do it. It can be said that intuition has always helped me in my life. But how can you predict how a person might change for you in the future? This will remain an unsolved issue for me. It took me 9 years of marriage to realize that the person I let into my life so closely would turn out to be a pathetic traitor. In a quiet corner of our favorite cafe, where the aroma of fresh coffee created a special atmosphere, I glanced at Lori and resolved to have the conversation that I had postponed for a whole year. You know, Lori, lately I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future. I began, trying to catch her gaze. Lori looked up at me, her eyes full of questions. Have you ever thought that maybe it's time to think about starting a family? It's a big decision, of course. We both have careers, plans to travel, but ultimately, we've been together for 9 years. We're financially stable, and we don't have that much time left until we're 30. Time flies. I continued, trying to choose my words carefully. She nodded. Yes, time waits for no one. Let's seriously consider this. Our story began shortly after I graduated from college. Lori worked at the cafe on my way to work, and from the first glance, I was enchanted. But it took me months to find the courage to ask her out on a date. A year after we met, I proposed to her, and we got married in Florida, surrounded by family and friends. Lori had always dreamed of opening her own cafe, and together we saved money for this dream, deciding to postpone the issue of children for better times. Over the course of 6 years, we managed to save enough to purchase and renovate an abandoned space. It took another 2 years for renovations and setup, but eventually, we opened our cafe. Our cafe experienced a boom, and we had to expand the team to meet the growing interest of visitors. During this time, I was actively involved in the work there, while my wife Lori took on most of the management responsibilities. We always had a contingency plan in case things didn't go as planned. Lori usually stayed late at the cafe, taking care of cleaning and finances, and sometimes I helped her so that we could return home together. Everything was going well, and when the cafe started bringing in a steady income, we began considering expanding our family. I broached the subject with Lori, but despite my efforts, I didn't see any initiative from her in that direction. I even underwent a medical examination to ensure my health, and everything was fine. I suggested to Lori to visit a doctor, but I was met with her refusal, which caused me concern. One day during lunch at a restaurant, I decided to directly ask Lori about our family plans. She expressed concerns about who would manage the cafe if she became pregnant. I proposed finding a replacement during her absence and even expressed willingness to leave my job for the cafe. Lori agreed to give it another try, but time passed and she never brought up the issue again, as if it didn't interest her at all. Eventually, when we touched on the subject again, Lori accused me of ignoring her wishes and dreams of running the cafe. I was disappointed, not so much by her disagreement, but by her abandonment of our previously agreed-upon decision. I'd always been willing to compromise, whereas Lori seemed unwilling to meet me halfway. It all began when I decided to set aside my personal desires to support her in pursuing her dream. I doubled down on my efforts, working extra hours and overtime to make a significant financial contribution. Often, I had to give up something personal to save for her goals. But when she expressed a willingness to compromise over dinner a week after my decision, it encouraged me. We immediately got to work, but after 4 months of failures, my disappointment reached its limit. Lori simply couldn't conceive. I became proactive, consulting a doctor for a checkup, including a sperm analysis. Thankfully, my workplace offered several free visits per year. The doctor confirmed that everything was fine with me, which led me to consider potential fertility issues with Lori. Bringing up this issue was not easy. I didn't want her to feel guilty or see it as an attack, so one night, lying in bed, I cautiously broached the subject, taking the blame upon myself and suggesting once again to see a doctor. Despite her confidence that everything was fine and we just needed to wait, I decided to be patient. I conducted research and found articles stating that conception could take years. Everything seemed normal, and I tried to be patient until one morning while getting ready in the bathroom, I found an empty package of contraceptives in the trash bin. This discovery stunned me. I picked up the package, looked at my wedding ring on the bedside table, and suddenly felt reluctant to put it on. I couldn't understand why my wife was using contraceptives. Gathering my thoughts with difficulty, I went to the cafe where she worked, trying to act as usual. I mustered up the courage and decided to return home to talk to my wife. But after visiting home, where I found things moved around and realized that someone had been there, my concern only intensified. Because Lori wasn't home either, and it seemed like someone had been engaging in sexual activities there. Getting into the car, I finally allowed myself to cry for the first time in years, feeling the full weight of the situation. The day at work was awful, and I was filled with doubts about what to do next. One evening, sitting at the computer, I came across information about the contraceptive she was using. It turned out that this contraceptive was only available by prescription. Why do you need these pills if we both dream of having a child? Are you facing some health issues? I thought. Deciding not to delay, I resolved to go to her and discuss everything in person. Choosing a cozy cafe for the meeting, I left work early and headed to the appointed place. But to my disappointment, I couldn't find a place to park my car. Driving around the cafe in search of parking, I accidentally noticed her with a stranger around the corner of the establishment. Their brief kiss completely changed my perception of what was happening. I didn't go to the meeting instead. I turned around and drove in the opposite direction, with shock in my heart. I returned home, where puzzle pieces began to fall into places in my mind. Everything fit together. The pills, the desire to avoid pregnancy from someone else. I needed time to calm down and think everything through. After much contemplation, I realized that avoiding direct confrontation would not be possible, but accusing without evidence was not in my principles. So, I found Raymond Maldonado, a former detective, who agreed to help me unravel the situation. "Are you sure you want to know the whole truth?" he asked. My determination was unwavering. I needed facts for my next steps. By evening, when I returned home, Lori asked why I missed our meeting. "Just not feeling well," I joked, trying to conceal my true feelings. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, spending more time at the office and avoiding unnecessary encounters. There was a struggle within me about the decision I had to make after receiving the results of the investigation. After a week of investigation, Raymond invited me to meet, greeting me with a glass of whiskey. I downed it in one gulp and sat down. Raymond handed me a file, and I reviewed its contents. Scott, HOA Lori's former classmate, was the last person she slept with. They indulged in adultery together at a motel not far from the cafe. "I'm sorry, Mike, but she's cheating on you. Everything needed to prove her infidelity in court is in this folder," he said. I remained silent, simply feeling hollow. There was neither sadness nor anger. It took a few minutes before I stood up, shook Raymond's hand, and thanked him. Arriving home, I waited for Lori's return. When she came, I was already in the kitchen, preparing for a difficult conversation. "Let's talk," I said, handing her a cup of coffee and inviting her to sit. "Let's not talk about pregnancy. I'm really tired and not in the mood," she said, without much interest. She reluctantly sat down. "We will never talk about pregnancy. You've already given up on it." "The doctor prescribed you a good pill," I said, taking an empty birth control card out of my bag and placing it on the table. I saw her surprise and awkwardness. "It was in the trash can in the bathroom. No one else came to the house that belonged to you," I began. "I also found out that you had a doctor's appointment to avoid pregnancy. Let me clarify for you. I was just worried about our future. I didn't want children. They would have gotten in our way," she said. "Stop lying to me," I shouted. She covered her mouth with her hand and gasped, starting to cry. "You're just angry because I don't want children with you. You're a terrible person," she sobbed. "I love you," I said, pulling out the photo of Lori naked with Scott in the motel. "Let me show you what a despicable person looks like." "You've been spying on me," she shouted. "You're trying to confuse me." I hurled the coffee mug from the table, not at her but next to her. It was enough to make her understand the gravity of the situation. I met her gaze and carefully took the coffee mug from her hands. "I won't let it happen again," I whispered to myself. She turned around, seeing the mug crashing into her photo on the wall, spilling its contents. "I'm sorry. It was accidental," she began, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It was a mistake, Scott. He's an old friend," she added, trying to justify her actions. You think the guy who's secretly met you for months is just an old friend? I exploded. Her confession about the clandestine meetings boiled my blood. I forcefully slammed my fist on the table, demanding composure from myself. It took me 5 minutes before I could regain control. You can gather your things and leave. Don't come near me. We're getting divorced, I told her, feeling the rage boiling inside me. The next day, I met with the lawyer and told him about my intentions. I didn't want to leave the house until the divorce was finalized on Friday. I presented her with the documents. She took the papers in astonishment. "You thought I would tolerate your presence?" she smirked, barely holding back tears. "We'll manage without you," I replied firmly. "It's clear now. We're selling the cafe and splitting the proceeds. That's my deal." She resisted. "I don't want to sell it. It's mine. You have to reimburse every penny I invested," I insisted. "Otherwise, we'll go to court." I left the house determined not to remain passive. I needed witnesses, so I headed to the cafe to talk to the waiter who surely knew about my wife's infidelity but chose not to disclose the information. Though I was sure he knew and understood everything, the next week, Lori's lawyer proposed a deal. I could have everything else if she kept the cafe, but it wasn't just the cafe I wanted. I wanted to take everything from her, down to the last dollar, so she would be left with nothing and regret her actions for the rest of her life. I decided she didn't deserve for me to agree to her terms, so I asked my lawyer to reject them. I was planning to meet her in court on my way home from the office, preparing for the upcoming legal battle. But the next day, my mom called and asked if I could stop by. She lived nearby, so it wouldn't be much of a detour. My mom had been living alone since I got married. My father passed away from a heart attack while I was in college. She was on a pension and managing the house, but it wasn't enough to cover all her bills and groceries every month. I helped when I could. I knew my mom was making sacrifices to ensure I had everything I needed, especially during tough times after college when I was trying to find my footing on my own. So, helping out my mom was a debt I owed. When I arrived at her house, she was already waiting on the porch. I sat down with her and asked what was wrong. "Are you filing for divorce?" she asked. "Yes, Lori and I are getting divorced," I replied coldly. "Lori called and apologized," my mom said. "You need to forgive her and move on." I looked at her. "My mother has traditional views on family relationships." She nodded, emphasizing that our family fights for marriage and doesn't give up in the face of obstacles, no matter what. I listened to my mom but didn't mention the affair because I thought it would deeply hurt her. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I knew many family members on my mom's side were stuck in unhappy marriages because of their staunch resistance to divorce, regardless of how generous one partner's actions were towards the other. Some endured constant abuse, infidelity, and even secret families, but they maintained the facade of impeccable Christians, which seemed odd to me. It was all fake, and I didn't want to continue living in the illusion of a happy marriage. My mom suggested seeking help, recommending therapy, or trying to work things out. She mentioned that Lori seemed to regret her actions and didn't want a divorce. Once again, I rolled my eyes, convinced that Lori's only concern was to placate my mother. "I'll think about it," I said, but deep down, I had no intention of letting Lori off the hook. I had already made it clear to her that I would accept the judge's decision but wouldn't agree to her terms, as I had done many times before. I cared about myself and my well-being, so I wasn't going to make concessions to someone who betrayed me. A week later on my day off, I was awakened by a call from my mom. "I'm having computer problems," she said. I already anticipated that it would be the usual. My mom, not very tech-savvy, getting tangled up in her online affairs. "Got it. I'll be there soon," I replied, knowing that another visit to her house awaited me to help with files and photos. Once I'd freed up some space on her hard drive, I quickly checked the computer's performance. Opening the browser, I saw emails from both my mom and Lori. "Mom, why do you have so many emails from Lori?" I asked, noticing the recent messages. My mom's response shocked me. It turns out Lori confessed her infidelity to her. I couldn't believe my eyes as I read about it in the emails. What infuriated me even more was my mom's certainty that I wouldn't leave Lori because of this. As I continued reading, I came across a letter where Lori sought advice from my mom regarding our divorce. My mom, confident that I would never leave, advised her to keep her affairs hidden and not bring other men into our home. It was too much. I felt my blood boiling in my veins. How could my own mother do this? I wondered. Scrolling further, I found a letter where Lori asked my mom for help. My mom made her first mistake, assuming I would never divorce. She didn't even know that my father, who seemed so faithful, had actually left because of her foolish actions. I realized that my mother had cheated on my father, and he knew about it and wanted to divorce her. I realized he would have gone for a one-sided divorce if he had known about her infidelity, though family meant a lot to him. He wouldn't let a bad marriage hold him back, and I didn't want that either. Analyzing additional documents, I discovered that my father had filed for divorce but died of a heart attack before the court hearing. My mother was to blame for his death, as she received money from Lori every month. This explained my mother's motives in her emails. She loved money more than her own son. I downloaded the chain of emails and sent it to my lawyer, asking if we could use it. He mentioned it was last minute, but would see what could be done. It was Lori's admission of her affair, and there were only 2 weeks left until the divorce process. I wanted to rid myself of the nightmare. As for Lori, I don't know what became of her. The judge ordered to close her shop so I could put it up for sale. Driving by last week, I noticed the darkened windows, indicating she had at least complied with the judge's order. But I couldn't pity her, not even on a human level. My family, on my father's side, helped me tremendously, even offering a room in their home until I sorted things out. But now, I prefer to be alone. I asked them to help me find a house that wouldn't cost me too much. If they were willing to help, the drama surrounding my divorce is over. But I still need to sort out 2 chapters first. I sued Scott for alienation of affection, sharing details of his affair with his office, though I didn't expect anything from it. Lori wasn't a coworker. Secondly, to my surprise, I sent the alarm money to his wife, who was already planning to divorce him. But now, she will file on grounds of infidelity. And most importantly, I stopped sending money to my mother, which I usually do every month. When she noticed the lack of funds, she asked me about them. I explained that since Lori was paying her, I didn't need to. To her objections, I told her she sided with Lori, not her own son, and that I was done with her. I suggested she ask Lori for financial help after all. They're old friends, aren't they? Not very pleasant, but I didn't care. She claims Lori said nothing because of the judge's wrong decision. She says she received nothing from me. I wished her luck, and she responded by calling me ungrateful. She says her nephews would never act like that. I replied that she should ask them for help after all. They're good guys. And then she started begging, playing on maternal feelings. But I told her it's not about that. I told her she's a bad person. A good one wouldn't encourage my wife to cheat. Let her enjoy the forbidden fruits of life. Just don't get caught. Now she knows that I know about her betrayal. Jesus says to forgive, but I simply cut her off and told her not to call anymore. Then, the messages from family members started coming. Apparently, Mom was spreading rumors that I had cut her off, saying that she was getting in my way. I sent threats by mail to everyone who called or messaged. Now, half are on my side and half on Mom's. They don't invite me to holidays, weddings, barbecues, but I don't care. My family side is toxic, but I want to be near them because my mom is there. But now that I'm not talking to her, I don't need to deal with the rest either. I've gone through therapy, and now I'm okay. The mood is lifted by the 2 German shepherds I adopted from the shelter. At first, there was skepticism, but they turned out to be amazing. The best feeling is coming home and seeing them greet me happily. I think I found unconditional love and support. I don't plan on getting into relationships anytime soon. It's not interesting to me. I'm focused on work, and in the future, I plan to open my own cafe. I'm confident it will all work out. My ex-wife's lover left her, clearly not expecting such a turn of events, but I don't care anymore. I've done my part.